And we're live with our 184th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm back. I'm at CK Tricky on Twitter, at CK Tricky in real life, joined by my co-host Seth Law, at Seth Law on Twitter and in real life.
Apparently. Wait, are there differences? I don't know anymore, right? Like, hey, everybody, welcome to another show.
Awesome.
I know we're a little bit behind on posting episodes and a few other things, but basically we've just had, Ken was on vacation last week. We've had, life issues happening, getting old and taking care of stuff, just sucks at times, but we are dedicated to getting back to podcast episodes and talking about news and everything else. Ken, I don't know if you watched the episode with Legendary Pat while you were away, but it was wild.
First 20 minutes and then the last 10 minutes, and then I haven't caught up since.
Yeah. It was it was interesting to talk about information warfare and the current global climate, but analysis. Honestly, a lot of it goes to what we were talking about before the podcast, actually, where critical thinking of information as it comes into you and trusting of sources, which we don't seem to do a lot of nowadays, right? Like we consume and trust social media and people on social media just because they posted a video without doing any sort of analysis. And that's one of the things that's interesting to see in the info warfare, cyber warfare space, is how much just kind of analysis Legendary Pat was talking about, and how much time they spend digging into sources and actually looking into provenance of information, as opposed to just, hey, taking a journal, like one journalist's take or one person's take on any given source of information. I know you and I have a tendency to, spitball off of one or so articles. And I don't think we necessarily talk to people a lot about how we disseminate that information or we gather it. Because I know a lot of times when we're pulling those articles, it is, we're pulling one that looks fairly relevant to us out of a source of, 10 or 15 different locations that the information is coming in from. And there are different outlets that, and honestly, guys, from a podcast perspective today, we are just kind of jumping through hoops. So bear with us. Right. But I know that there's certain locations that I don't have a tendency are sensationalized security news, right? And I don't know if you have kind of that same list in the back of your head of places where I don't like to link articles from, because it's usually not very informative or it doesn't go deep enough. And so when we're trying to post articles, a lot of it is I'm trying to identify a source that looks good to me and they're doing a real analysis, as opposed to just sensationalizing the news. Is that your, what is your experience when it comes to actually,
taking a cynical? Yeah, there are trusted sources, and then there are there's that eye of that having an eye on, just a cynical eye. You kind of have to. I think that's probably natural to security people in general, but I think being pretty cynical. I think I sent you an article where I was rolling my eyes the other day, where it was what this isn't a bypass, man. And I was like, I don't know. You read the technical article, and it's supposed to be technical anyways, and it was wow, this is garbage. Pretty easy. So I think I sent it to you. I was like, yeah. I spent my time reading the entire article, and I got down and I was like, that was it. Okay, that was garbage, and it's not accurate, and it doesn't go into the underlying root cause, and blah blah blah. So it's part who's the source, and then the other part is actually kind of picking apart and dissecting and having a lot of heavy skepticism of what you're reading. You kind of have to, and then if it seems it's past the sniff test, then it's worth talking about, which is pretty much how we do this, week to week.
Yeah. Yep. So. And so along those lines, if you want to learn how to do that, just go triage bug bounty reports for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, man.
Because there is, Yeah, I guess that's all I should say on that, because it does, there is quite a bit of just not very
There's
well researched articles that come in. I mean, there's really good stuff, but it's yeah.
sometimes it's just like people that are not, they're newer in their career and they're trying to, and in those cases it's kind of like, well, you know, I'm not going to put anybody on blast for doing that. They're trying to get better at writing. They're trying to get some visibility out there, and they're just trying. So like, you know, that's fine. But you do have to recognize when it's someone purposefully putting out bullshit, and then when it's somebody who's just like, no, I just don't know as much as, you know, that I'm newer, right? And this is what I know for my level, and this is what I thought might be helpful for someone else. In that case, maybe it is helpful for someone at their level or below. And so it's like, I don't, you know, yeah, it's always for me, it depends kind of situation there, but you come across that for sure.
Yep. But I mean, I was calling back into it basically because the reports that come in, from what I've seen, and I don't know if you're like, you guys have a more mature bug bounty pipeline and practice, but a lot of the reports that I see coming into smaller programs, there's typically a finding, but there might be no recommendation. There's no impact statement. There's like it, and a lot of that is early career people or people that haven't, you know, they don't have as much experience on some of the programs and how to write like a fully flushed out report. So doing the initial analysis and triage in those reports as it comes in forces you as a security like professional to actually go to the root cause, figure out what the impact actually is. I mean, you can push that back on the researcher, but a lot of times they won't either understand the ask, or they don't understand your specific program or company in enough depth to actually do that sort of analysis. And
That's
so
true. We do that where we go back to them and say like, here, maybe your reproduction steps were unclear. Maybe there's parts of your write-up that are unclear. And yeah, to your point, sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just not going to work. And it's like, well, we will do everything we can to investigate. But if you can't provide, you know, sort of reproduction steps that make sense, and we can't figure out what you're talking about and we can't reproduce it, then it's going to be something that's going to be dropped. Right. That's the reality. You're not going to get paid for it.
Yeah. Anyway, so you know, validate your sources, right? That's a big thing that I guess the takeaway is from our initial conversation here. Don't trust any single source of data. Like validate who it's actually from, what it actually does. A lot of the tools that we talk about, Ken and I have actually played with previously, or we've got a good idea of how they function. Otherwise, we wouldn't bring it up, or it wouldn't be interesting to us. There's a reason that those things raise to the level of, hey, let's have a discussion about it on the podcast. There's a lot that we sift through that we just end up dropping because it isn't super interesting to us. And it might be interesting at some point to talk through why that is, Ken, right? Like when you are looking for interesting pieces of data to talk about on the podcast, what is it that piques your interest? Why is, you know, one article more interesting than another?
Yeah, for me, it's like new stuff I haven't seen before, or new takes on old, especially when it comes to attacks. That's always interesting. If there's some like novel way of doing some variant of an attack, that's always interesting. If there are alternatively, like, because my interests lie all over the place, you know, and because I do like from program management to actual hacking everywhere in between, it's like, you know, if there's, dude, honestly, if somebody has like a cool way of managing an SDL, like an open source tool, or even just like, you know, an explanation of how a company did their, you know, overhauled their SDL processes, I'm all in. I want to read that. I want to hear about it. I think that's super interesting. Same goes for, you know, like I said, like the tool that we were talking about before the podcast, that was like, at first glance, it was like, this might be bullshit. And then we like looked into it, we're like, oh, this is actually really, really dope. Like this could be pretty useful, you know? And so it is, I have a wide range of interests, but yeah, it's pretty much like typically new things, or, you know, even not new things, but just like people sharing things that are helpful. Right. So,
yep.
And sometimes and I think we got on the whole conversation because I was expressing some annoyance with the whole Twitter Mudge thing, because it's like you have all of these entities who have different interests, and they're like using this as their like, I mentioned Elon has all, his whole thing is like, oh, too many bots, all that on, I can back out of the deal type thing. There's an agenda there. There's an agenda for the government to do more regulation and censorship of, people. There's agendas there. There's an allow for more litigation, right? It's like, but at the end of the day, and then there's Mudge's own agendas, which we can only guess, right? We speculate. We don't know what's inside Mudge's head, right? And then at the end of the day, the last person that actually matters in all of this, and even then it's somewhat questionable. Like, what is your opinion on Twitter that you post publicly? Is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about like what we had mentioned before, where it's like you're a political activist and maybe your location's what's sensitive or something of that nature? It comes down to like, what are we trying? Who are we trying to protect, and what of their assets are we trying to protect? But those people are like, seem to be getting the least amount of attention and seem to be the least bit of focus here. And the broader seems to be like, here's this big tech company. Let's use them as an example for all these other assholes, agendas. And apologies, I'm a little spicy today because I'm super annoyed with some of the goings ons in the world. And so this is another one where I was telling you before the podcast, like, this whole thing is annoying the crap out of me the longer it goes on, just because of that whole thing. It's everybody's got an agenda, and none of it really is for the people that, they claim to be trying to protect. So at least that's how it feels. So
yeah, well, I don't know. I think we talked about this when we dove deep into the whistleblower stuff from Mudge. Right, like what is it that we're really concerned about from a security perspective, right? Like, overall security practices at Twitter, how does that affect me on a day-to-day basis, or my data? Because mostly what Twitter knows about me, right, personally, right, at Seth Law on Twitter, is that, man, I post once in a while. They probably have some location data on where I'm logging in from, but I mean, it's nothing that's really as sensitive as other locations. And so why is it that this is such a big deal? Is it because it is a public discourse, because they have been in the news from a political perspective? Is it because Elon's taking it over, right? There's so many different, to your point, there's so many different there's
basically
agendas. Yes,
agendas, like
there's so many different agendas, and the people that are putting that out there have their own agenda, and we don't necessarily do critical thinking about the sources as they're coming in, taking away the fact that we don't analyze social media in the same way that we do even like journalistic or journalism and different papers and online sources. And so I don't know, right? Like, I'm with you. We're probably giving it way more attention than it necessarily needs at this point.
Yeah, I know. But but going back to it, that was the reason I bring it up is that was the whole idea of, I was talking about like, where do you get your sources? How do you decide, like, what's interesting, and what not just what's interesting, but what's valid to talk about, like what's something that's worth talking about. And, that's definitely a part of it. Is like, what is the motivation and intention? It's always something I think about when I'm reading an article, like, in something we want to share. Like, is the intention something that I'm aligned with? And if it's not, I don't want to talk about it, or don't want to give it a ton of attention. So
and I mean, for me personally, right, like I go back to kind of what you were talking about before, like, to leave the Mudge Twitter stuff aside. Things that are interesting to me, as far as new tools, new techniques, and discovery. Obviously, whatever I'm currently like working through, whether that's Web3 stuff, because we've been talking about that a lot lately, but also like applying lessons learned from other aspects of life to my like work life, to security in general, right? Whether that is, hey, these are, techniques for, being positive, or like managing stress, or, anything that necessarily applies to that. But I do have a tendency to drop out like stuff that's super specific to exploits, right? Like if you go look through things like, what is it, Reddit RNetSec or, Lobster Security, they'll do deep dives into, hey, there's this one specific edge case with XSS. And I'm like, man, I really, it doesn't affect me from a day-to-day perspective, right? Like, I mean, I think we've talked about XSS in the past, like at this point, like yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like there was, what was it? Gareth the Hayes had some
Oh yeah.
article with injection that was shared, and stuff like that can certainly be interesting, but and also there's that thing of, like you said, where with work, where it's like, well, there are times where, say, what's that? Did I lose you?
Oh yeah. No, go ahead. Yep.
Oh, I think,
I could still
sorry, I
hear
might be
you.
having internet
Did you lose
issues or
me?
something. No, I see you and I can hear you now. Um, am I good? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, cool. Man, I forgot what I was talking. Oh yeah, like so. Yeah, so bringing work and life into the sort of the mix, and that's like, who knows? Maybe like template injection is a big thing that I'm interested in right now because of some technology we're implementing or whatever it might be, right? So those things are helpful for that. But yeah, it's like, dude, at the end of the day, it's like the same underlying root causes of all these things, and I think at a certain point it becomes less about like, it becomes less fun to, like, yeah, have another variant of the same old attack, and it's more interesting to hear about like the modern defenses. Like when we had Neil on for the first time, when he was talking about content security policy, man, that was a fascinating conversation. Like I was really fascinated in content security policy because, like, this is a modern way to prevent something that is just so hard to actually tackle. It's such a huge challenge. It's like, even if with the best security teams, like you're eventually going to have cross-site scripting. So it's more interesting to have something that, like, in those cases prevent. Yeah. Anyways, we go on forever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and to that point, right? Like, so we can drop this article in there from Gareth, right? But again, it's just kind of a nuance. Like, it's another payload to add to your list of, another way that people can call JavaScript without parentheses. Okay, that's great, but how often do I run into a specific application that prevents the use of parentheses for executing JavaScript, right? Like, I mean, maybe in like the bug bounty world, there's more edge cases where this sort of thing pops up. But in general, from a consulting perspective, I don't see cross-site scripting near as much in the last couple of years as I did maybe 5 years ago. I just, like, with React applications, with SPAs, and the preventions that exist in CSP, it's become such a kind of non-issue to me that this sort of thing, while interesting from an attacker perspective, is really less. It's become less interesting to me personally, right? So yeah, we'll post it up there and we'll talk about it. There's interesting research that happens along all these avenues, but it's not as interesting to me as, say, a new tool that's going to, like this other one that we were looking at, the tool that's looking at 403 bypasses. Where do I have that? Yeah. Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say the one thing I think that is interesting to me right now, and not necessarily a technical thing, is the whole Patreon security team
Oh,
bit.
yes.
I mean, that is, man, I don't know even where to begin with that one. I don't know if you want to talk about that now, or if you like, what your
Sure.
thoughts are. Yeah. So first of all, maybe do you want to summarize the situation for people?
Yes. So I mean, it came out like this last week, right? That Patreon, for whatever reason, laid off what was said at the time, right? Um, their full security team, right? Um, and like there was a few, Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of articles posted about it. Obviously, laying off your full security team is probably not the safest way to go about. Um, like
Yeah, they
securing
let.
your platform, right?
I mean,
Go ahead.
they let go. No, I was going to add to that. They laid off 17% of their workforce in total.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just in general. So, but basically, it was security that was a huge part of that.
Yeah, and when they finally responded to it, they said that the security layoffs were not a part of the general 17%, but it was due to a strategic shift in how they were implementing security. Um, what that actually means, if they're moving to a model where they outsource some of the security or they're doing something else, we don't know. Basically, as an industry, there was a lot of finger pointing that went on. If you look at the different articles that were posted about this, from oh crap, Patreon has now like completely, they just don't care about security anymore, and why is this happening, and go hire these guys, they're fine. It just was a lot of speculation as to what's going on without a lot of information. And again, this goes back to that agenda that we're talking about, right? Like obviously, if you get let go and you are a security professional, that people are going to see that, right? Whether it's LinkedIn profiles or whatever is going on, and they're going to start to question what the organization is actually doing. So
as of today, as of 2 days ago, Patreon confirmed that it laid off 5 members of its security team. That doesn't sound like the entire security team, but that I think the original reason that people said, I'm going to backpedal here and say, like, hold on, maybe it's not as much of that 17% as we figured. I figured because as I'm rereading this, there was not an initial denial that they laid off the entire security team. And there was confirmation they laid off 5 people. So there was sort of this idea that it could be anywhere in between those two numbers, like 5 people and the entirety of the security team. But yeah, no, so they said it's 5 people as of today, plus another 80 employees. And they deny that the 5 people that were laid off from security represent the entire security team. So they finally put out there that's not the entire security team.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So I mean, it's probably more a story of, okay, if you are going to lay off or fire critical employees, and again, this probably goes to Twitter too, you probably want to get ahead of that story as an organization, right? So one of those members posted on LinkedIn, and that's where it all spun from, is, hey, I got laid off from my job. They fired the whole security team, and Patreon just didn't have a response to it. And so it got picked up by the different security feeds, Twitter, and security news channels, and they posted about it. And so now they're trying to backpedal and actually, well, not necessarily backpedal, but explain their side of the story, because it does seem like a kind of a regular thing. They've just shifted in priority. And I mean, honestly, we don't know, right? I know through some back channels that it wasn't the full story, right? Like, there's some other Slack channels that we're in that we were hearing through the grapevine that it wasn't the full story. What we're seeing now is probably more appropriate, as opposed to the hot takes that people had on that.
I do. Well, because there was this, there were statements, and I was trying to actually find out where those statements were, because I've read them in multiple places where it was, we're actually going to have those functions go to our developers. Essentially, is how it read, and what it sounded like. And so, so here's what I think people interpreted that as: we're laying off our security team, and the engineers are going to take care of that. And if that was true, that would be awful. that would be terrible, right? You do need, obviously, still, like, security champions are great, which is what an engineer who's got a security minded sort of like bend to them is. But there is a total difference between that and, real security, right?
Yeah.
But
well,
it doesn't sound like that's
security for the organization. Yeah.
Yeah, because you have to have a guide. You have to have somebody wrangling requirements, training. A lot of the things that I could go on. That's a whole other hour episode in and of itself of all the things that essentially a security team who's governing security champions should do or would do in an organization of Patreon size. I think they've made like $3.5 billion in a year, and they've got. I think I'd read. I don't know, like if 80 people, it's 250,000 creators and something like 8 million users, something like that. So in a pretty large workforce. So having said that, yeah, you would need to govern a lot of things as security who is managing these security champions. That's my point. But I don't think they're saying that they're giving all of the security back over to the engineers at all. It doesn't sound like that. They did kind of make it sound like that in the wording. I would hope that's not the case. I think it's great, like I said, to empower developers to be security minded. I don't think it's okay to offload all of your security to developers.
Yeah.
There's also like security is a host of things. Like most people don't realize, I say most people who are security, sorry about that. Most people who are not in security don't realize like there are many functions as it pertains to platforms like this, because you're going to have your anti-abuse stuff. You're going to have teams dedicated to, of course, everybody knows about cloud and infrastructure stuff, but there's a lot of lesser known things around compliance and risk and just a whole bunch of interesting security functions that occur beyond what people might typically consider to be security.
Yep.
So,
yeah. So I, again, take it with a grain of salt, right? Like the initial hot take on a lot of these is probably not the full story. So before jumping to conclusions, investigate what those sources are, what their agenda is, and in pushing that out. Because a lot of this did come from one of those employees or one of those, one of the people that got laid off. So, they probably weren't in the best headspace when they started posting this stuff, and it just got picked up.
Which is one of the benefits of doing a weekly podcast that we don't really ever talk about, is that if you notice, like, we're not on Twitter giving immediate hot takes, right? Like we joke that we're giving hot takes, but usually when we're talking about something like a Patreon or whatever, Twitter or whatever, we're usually talking about it days after, even maybe a week or so after all of that information that is relevant has come out. And so, it's a hot take in the sense that we're catching up on all that, but we've usually let enough information surface to comment on it. And that's why, as you know, I am not a fan of hanging out on Twitter anymore, because it has turned into that, here's information I need to comment on immediately to be relevant. And that doesn't work, because you're probably going to just add fuel to the fire that doesn't help anyone, So anyways, like, whatever.
Yeah. There's a lot of finger pointing that goes on in that initial analysis before we know what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So the other tool.
Croc takes. I love it. This needs to be on a shirt, man. That's awesome.
We need our socks and Crocs shirt to, Crocs and socks, whatever it is, shirt to be done. Sweet. Let's see. The other tool that I actually posted on the in both channels, right? Like, so on YouTube and in Slack, was the Don't Go 403 DevPloit GitHub repository. This one I found because of Clint Gibbler, right? If you are not subscribed to TLDR-sec, you should be. It's a great source of data, information, and news. Clint has a very good way of distilling down what's interesting. Again, like what he posts, some of it is interesting to us, some of it isn't. But this one, in this case, was, it's a fairly useful tool to add to our arsenal when we're doing some sort of an assessment. A few, episodes ago, I don't remember exactly how long ago, I did talk about bypassing 403 through a proxy or through a WAF. This takes that a bit further and actually has a list of different locations and different places that you can use to bypass 403 responses from any sort of WAF or proxy, just based on controls, again, user controlled data that's going into the request. whether that is location headers, whether that is parameters or whatever else, right, that goes into it. They've got a few places that they do that. The interesting thing there, I'm actually going to do a pull request on it and have them add in that other finding that I had, because it would be useful there too with it. Oh yeah, you want to show just the demo there quick from Don't Go For It?
Yeah, pretty easy, right? They have an API or server they're sending requests to, URL rather. Sorry, if you're listening, you're probably going to watch this part on the video. We're at like 30 minutes in. So yeah, if you go to the actual, if you're viewing this, you can see what we're seeing, which is, yeah, you see like up above, it's got some custom paths. It's getting 403s, 429s, 404s, and then in 403, and then it starts doing some with the endpoints or the HTTP paths that it's requesting. It starts modifying them. So in the capitalization modifications, it basically, you see like the /app/beta. Can't talk today. They've got, beta as BET and then capital A, and then they have the next one is BE, capital T, lowercase a. And so they've got just variations. And that's basically what it's doing. And I think it speaks to, yeah, now I'm going to pause because Seth, you've actually come across this. We talked about it a month ago, 2 months ago, you coming across this. I know you talked about it in the secure code review course, but yeah, do you want to speak to sort of like how you've seen this in the past?
Yeah, I mean, this is, if the developers or like the people that put in the WAF have any sort of regular expressions associated with like beta in this case, right? Like they're not ignoring case to do their match. And so hence like a capital A is different than a lowercase a, but the web server on the back end or the application server interprets them. It ignores the case. So it's that mismatch or edge case that's actually allowing the traffic to flow through to bypass the 403. The instance that I actually saw was a case of URL encoding, which could do the same thing, where if you are URL encoded one of the characters in the path, it would bypass the WAF and go directly to the page behind the scenes, because the web server would do URL decoding, but the WAF didn't do it before it compared in its regular expression. So all of these sorts of bypasses can exist. And it's because we have so many steps in this chain when we're getting to an application, right? We have maybe a proxy in place, maybe Nginx in front, like as a proxy in front of or a WAF in front of the application server or the web server. And each of those implements technology in a slightly different manner. That's not necessarily a fault of them, but this is the same mismatch that is taken advantage of for request smuggling and other avenues that we've seen in the recent past from a vulnerability class perspective. The misalignment of these technologies is where the edge cases exist and where the flaws exist, which is what makes this so interesting, right? It's just a different edge case, a different way to automate analysis of 403 responses. And it wouldn't surprise me if this gets added as a Burp plugin within the next couple of weeks, right?
Okay, so that's the thing, man. That's what I would say. Like, because as cool as this this is, like that's at the end of the day with most of these tools, that's what it comes back to, is people just end up taking out their payloads and loading them up in Burp Intruder, because Intruder will not just look at response codes. It'll allow you to do anything. It'll allow you to like timing. It'll allow you to analyze timing. It'll allow you to analyze the content length responses, because you and I know sometimes a 404 is not a 404, right? Sometimes a 302 is not a 302 even. It's a we've talked about this before, where the chain of execution in a authorization function doesn't work like you think. Still allows chain of execution, sends back a 302 in a redirect, but it still renders the entirety of whatever page you're requesting that you shouldn't have access to. And so then in Burp, you go and change your proxy to like change 302 or 301 to like in the location headers, and to strip the location headers and change the response code, and then boom, you're stripping that in the response, and you're operating on the site as normal. So, but back to your point, that's what I think people always do, right? They just take a tool like this, they strip out the payloads, they put it into Burp, and that's typically how it works. So,
yeah.
And I know everybody's going to say, well, what about Zap? And I'm like, I don't.
What about it?
Exactly. I don't use it, so I don't tell you.
Yeah.
If you use it,
I'm
cool.
sure. Yeah, I'm sure there's ways to add the same thing in Zap,
sure.
or functionality to be pushed in there, if that's your tool of choice. Hey, yeah. We've just been around for a long time and have settled onto Burp. So
I was telling somebody though, like I remember back on like years ago, every time you would see someone talk about Burp or intercepting proxy, you'd see Simon from the Zap project pipe up and be like, "Hey, have you heard about Zap?" And it was like the Bitcoin scamming. I'm not saying it's a scam. I'm just saying it's similar in that, like we're like every time we mention something about a coin or Ethereum or whatever blockchain stuff or DeFi or Web3, immediately we get hit up responses on Twitter about all that stuff. So, but anyways, whatever. Yeah, it was just kind of funny. That used to be like the thing. If you said Burp, usually you get a like, "Hey, have you heard of Zap?" type thing.
Have you heard of Zap?
So,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of which, the Ethereum, switch has happened. I don't know if that's, or not. Speaking of Burp, speaking of Web3, right?
Oh yeah. Oh hey, sorry. One last thing.
Yeah.
Before we go into that, did you know that Burp or Portswigger's up to like 100 and something employees now? Like I think like 121 employees or something like that.
That's pretty awesome.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty huge, right?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, right? Like, I know, because we use Burp and, we've grown as a consultancy. I know I send them more money today than I did, a few years ago. And, as far as a tool that's being used, it's useful to us. Like, I don't have a problem doing that. So it's good to see that they grow, and they do provide quite a bit of updates, research. There's been a lot of interesting things. Obviously, we've had James Kettle on the podcast. He's one of their researchers. And, they support the community pretty heavily. So it's a good organization. Not that Zap and OWASP doesn't as well, but it's good to have two different tools that are pushing each other and competing with each other. Right. I mean, when you and I first got into the space, I don't know if you've always been on Burp, but my initial experience with, intercepting proxies was, things like WebScarab was the most useful to me. And, or Fiddler back in the day. And those, like you look at them now.
Cat. Did you remember Cat? Because I used Cat for a while because I was like, this is pretty cool. And it just died off. But yeah.
Yep. Yeah, there was all sorts of these like different tools that were out there and didn't quite fit the space, or didn't keep they didn't keep getting developed on, or whatever it is. But now we're seeing even better ones pop up, right? Like I would argue that like Proxy Man and some of those that are out there have a slicker interface and are easier to use than Burp Suite. But we're so embedded with Burp Suite, and we know it now, that it's hard to get away from that, especially the extensions. The ability to do extensions is huge, right?
Yeah, I mean, Anthony brings up a good point about their enterprise platform too. Now they've got that, which is like what was requested for so long as a way to support, enterprise style testing.
Yeah. I have issues with the enterprise platform. I'll be honest, right?
I haven't used it.
I need to go back and revisit it. But like it was, but at the time, granted, I should be fair. It's been a few years since they released it, and it was definitely kind of beta-ish software at the time. I'm sure it's gotten better since then. But my initial take on it was, feels like we're going a few years back on, from a enterprise scanning perspective. So I should revisit it, because it is the Burp scanner in and of itself is so powerful in the desktop application that if they can apply that to the enterprise, it'll just become a better tool for scanning your apps, right?
It definitely can't be as bad as 2010 Web Inspect. That was the most awful shit ever. And it would
maintaining authentication state. Yeah.
Oh gosh. Yeah. That whole thing. So many issues. But anyways, I mean, that was a long time ago. I don't know. Yeah.
Sweet. So that was Don't Go 403, and apparently a rant on Burp Suite.
Oh,
And
Ethereum. I'm sorry, I cut you off. You're going to talk about the Ethereum
oh,
merge.
yes, the Ethereum merge. So, Ken, what do you know about the Ethereum merge?
I know they changed to proof of stake so that computationally it wouldn't be as difficult. It would reduce computation by, I think, 99.9%, which means energy usage would go like way down.
Yep.
I read up on what proof of stake is, and now I totally forget. So I don't know if you want to remind people. I think I even talked about it on the podcast. That's what happens. I read things, learn it, and totally forget.
Okay. So proof of work versus proof of stake. So Bitcoin and Ethereum, the first version, right? Not what they've actually merged to now, were proof of work blockchains, right? So basically, to mint or to perform work on the blockchain, you were rewarded for doing work, right? So for Bitcoin, you have a mining rig that runs a bunch of calculations. You're rewarded in being able to generate the next chain, or put the next chain onto the blockchain, and you get paid for that, right? That's proof of work. Whereas proof of stake is the chain itself writes a new block and rewards someone who has coin or stake in the blockchain, right? So they hold a bunch of Ethereum, and those the people that have stake are rewarded with with points or with coin for having stake on the chain. So it allows for faster generation of the blocks on the blockchain, because it doesn't require these large, expensive crypto calculations to be done, which reduces the cost and allows it to be more regular as far as like generating those chains generating the blocks before they're put on the chain. I mean, that's the simple explanation. Obviously, you can go read up on it, at ethereum.org if you want to know more, or the different. That's the difference between these mining rigs that you see out there for. I mean, it was Ethereum and Bitcoin for a long time. You could mine on either chain, and if you were able to write that next block, then you got paid out based on what that actually was. But it became more and more expensive over time because, number one, the crypto got harder to do, and it was all based on how much capacity was out there. So the more miners that were available, the harder it was to actually earn rewards, which made it more expensive because you would have to add more miners to your pool in order to actually get that reward back. And so it was this kind of competing large capacity that was out there. Nowadays, right, like it's all about stake. So the more money that you put into Ethereum, the more likely you are to actually be able to get that reward out, right? So it's kind of flipped it. But that was the conversion. Is Ethereum has moved from proof of work, which is the mining rigs, to proof of stake, which is just I've invested so much money in Ethereum that I get that back out. I get a small percentage back out.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it definitely makes sense. Yeah. What do you think the ramifications of this are?
Well, if you talk to the miners, they hate it, right? Because it means that all these rigs that they have from an Ethereum perspective are no longer needed, right? So they've got to switch to something else in order to pay for, to cover their costs, whether that's rolling back to Bitcoin, choosing another proof of stake blockchain, whatever it is. I think from an Ethereum perspective, the reason that they've moved off of it is they recognize that there was a significant cost, like energy and just like climate cost to what they were doing, right? Because you start generating that much heat, you start taking that much energy, and realistically, it mines the block on the Ethereum blockchain, but what other value does that add to the community, to the world at large? And then from a stability perspective, it means that it's going to be more stable as far as how often blocks are mined, how often they can be put onto the blockchain, how quickly that can happen. So it's I mean, overall, I think it's a good thing. There's a reason why Ethereum decided to go that direction. It's just interesting that they finally pushed it through. We'll see what actually happens as far as the merge goes, right? For a long time, they've had Ethereum 2, right, which was the Ethereum that was proof of stake as opposed to Ethereum, which was the proof of work. But now it's all just Ethereum again.
Reading it, I was trying to see what people think security wise about this merge. First thing I came across was the network makes it more vulnerable to attack. I don't know. I have to actually read, because that's what I was going to ask you, is like, are there security? Do we think like it's going to be more vulnerable, less vulnerable, same? Any change there? You know,
I don't know, because there's quite a bit like there's discussions that can happen around right, the length of time that it takes to mine a block, right, means that records and transactions aren't recorded on the blockchain until that block is mined, right? Mm-hmm. So there's denial of service, there's repudiation issues, there's issues that you issue that with executing a transaction and then having to wait 5 to 10 minutes to actually have that mined on the blockchain. Mm-hmm. What does that do from a money transfer perspective? Is it too much time? Are there like transactions that won't go through because of it? Right. So it's not just, hey, I'm going to take over someone's account. There's other kind of real world consequences that you have with those timing issues that were associated with both Ethereum and Bitcoin because of the time it took to mine those different blocks and the variability that went into it.
They're saying like during the merger there will be a gap where you're going to know ahead of time. Like the actual writing here is, it says the extra information that proof of stake provides validators may reduce its security to some degree, but proof of stake incentivizes accurate block validation. Over the time, the problem of 2 consecutive blocks will be solved, because they were saying, the possibility of validators being informed ahead of time about which blocks are validating could enable them to manipulate the price with 2 consecutive blocks, using 2 consecutive blocks.
Yeah. So
but that's temporary. It sounds like that's there's a limited window for that.
Yeah. And I mean, overall, I think, I feel like it's a good thing just, coming into the space and seeing what's happening across the board. But I mean, you and I both know people that got into the mining space, years ago. Right.
Yeah.
And would set that up, and you started to talk to them on what their like monthly electricity costs were, and it was insane. Just spending $2,000 to make $500, right? Like that. Yeah.
I mean, I remember this. I remember the heyday when people were putting creds source code, and there weren't all the protections that there are now, and then people were just like using that to, and also, using that to like infiltrate, cloud services and crypto mine and ramp up numbers. But I also remember Chris Gates and we were doing the research for the DevOps talks that we gave for years, actually. But in the very early days of that, it was funny because we were using Shodan to kind of like find, open vulnerable instances. One of the vulnerable instances Chris came across was actively being mined, and like the usage kept spiking up to like 99% or whatever, and he kept wondering like, why is the usage so high? So he looked into it, and sure enough, is being used. It was actually I think a Redis instance that was being used as a crypto miner.
Interesting. Yep.
So and it was by accident. We were actually just talking about the like vulnerable like open instances and configuration things, and just like how people do it improperly, and also like inherent risk that lies there, because especially back in I think this is, I don't know, maybe like 2012 when we started piecing it together, in 2013 or 2014 when we started publicly talking about it. So it took like a year or two of research. And so those were early days. So back then, there was for in-memory databases, there was not a whole lot of anything in terms of, and not to say that it's evolved so greatly, but back then there was nothing at all. So open instances everywhere.
Interesting. Yeah.
I
don't know. I mean, there's quite a bit of research going on in the Web3 space. I mean, we're looking at a lot of contracts, and it's I don't know if I've expressed this, but it is definitely like it's pushing us quite a bit, right? Like I'm having to think about threats in a different manner. And like it's, there's so much that's at stake with some of those contracts and the amount of money that flows through them or potentially can go through them, that it kind of takes things up another level. You think about most of the consulting that we've done, or most of the things that we do from a security perspective, and missing a vulnerability. Yeah, okay, cross-site scripting, somebody can send out phishing or whatever else it is. But when you start talking about the smart contracts space and money that's being moved or accessed via wallets, and all of a sudden, I mean, look at Web3 is going great, right? Somebody drains a whole bunch of wallets and everybody's out $70 million, right? That's it. That's a much bigger kind of risk calculation that goes through my head when we're looking at these, as opposed to what's been traditionally the space in the past. Yeah, let's see, what else do you want to talk about? I'm not sure what Rafine's comment there is in reference to.
Can lead to access. Well, HTML injection is XSS, to be clear. Template injection is usually can lead to more of like a remote code execution situation. Unresisted
I think
file
he's probably talking to our like we're talking about XSS is we're not as super as interested.
Oh, not super as amped up. Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
I mean, you're absolutely right. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Rafine. Like there is a lot that can lead to it. So doing XSS tests is still important, right? I'll give you that.
No, yeah. Still, you have to test for it. I'm not saying that it's not something you have to do. Yeah. I want to be clear about that.
Yeah. It's just that when it comes to the podcast and the discussions that Ken and I have, it's not as interesting from a protection perspective or a new movement perspective as some of the other things, like even things as simple as open redirects, like new ways to approach those, finding those, it would probably warrant more of a discussion from us than something like, oh, here's another XSS edge case.
Yeah, I mean, like after 15 years, it's like for me anyways, how long can XSS be super interesting? But it's still something we got to test for, and honestly, content injection is probably the right way to classify it, anyways, versus XSS or HTML injection or whatever. Yep. And injection at the end of the day is all the same underlying cause, right? Confusion between data or intentional data and unintentional data. So, Anyways, confusion on the system.
Sweet, yeah. Let's see, what else do you want to talk about? We got a little bit more time. Oh, do you want to talk about Starbucks and their new NFTs?
What? I know. Yes, but what? All right. Shit. All right. Yeah. Let me read this.
Here's the press release, and I,
I have it up. I just didn't get to it yet. Yeah.
My take here is that this is the sort of realistic use of NFTs that I actually agree with. I'm going to be honest. So I've been explaining to non-technical people recently. Everybody's been asking, well, what are NFTs? Especially up to this point, right? Like the collection of NFTs, whether it's Bored Ape or whatever else, like we have a discussion about it. And I think it was my wife, Kelly, was like, so basically they're just digital Pokemon cards. And I was like,
kind of.
Yeah.
It's not a bad way to say it.
And I'm like, yeah, and you should probably associate about the same value to them that you do to Pokemon cards from like a general like user perspective.
Dude, Pokemon cards get expensive. I didn't know about like, I mean, I know of Pokemon, but I don't know anything about it until I was like, my son got into it. Max got into it a little bit. And I was very like, wow, the prices of some of these cards are pretty nuts. But
Yeah.
and to be clear, like to be clear, we have friends at Starbucks, right? So
Yeah.
we're this is all in love, and but yeah, actually, I'm curious. So you think you're saying this is actually like the first time you've seen, or one of the few times you've seen NFTs be used like with good intent, like it makes sense to use them.
Yeah, I mean, so and this is one of the cases for NFTs that I've like we've talked about a few times. And actually I've talked with our friends who is at Starbucks about this when he mentioned it to me actually during, DEF CON, right? We had a small discussion about it. But the ability to issue tokens or to members, like reward members, and then they can use that token to validate and get access to other things makes sense to me, right? Like you issue either a single use token or a token like a membership token that is used digitally to actually get access to other rewards, other discounts, whatever it is. I mean, it's the same thing as giving out a session ID, right? Like you log in, we know that you are CK Tricky. We have special rewards for you for being CK Tricky, and that's how you prove your identity to us, right? So we issue a token to your Starbucks wallet or whatever it is in this case, and you use that token to get access to special rewards, special events, whatever it is. That makes sense to me from a technological perspective, that there is an actual use case to generating that token. And the token could be something that does reference a specific image or, whatever else, but it's not the image that I'm keying off of. It's the token value itself. And I'm validating that receipt in order to give you access to other things. And it also gives you the ability to share that, right? Like if I'm in the Starbucks community, and I don't know if they've gone this full route, but if I have say a family friend and I want, like, I'm not using it anymore, maybe I pass that on, and there's the ability to actually exchange that token to someone else and give them the rewards as well, or pass it on so I don't get them anymore, they do. That sort of thing is useful to me, right? And I look at that use case for tickets and other spaces as well. It won't surprise me when SeatGeek and Ticketmaster and the others actually start issuing NFTs for events, because it's the same sort of idea. It makes it easy to actually sell on. They can see provenance of an NFT. It was minted by Ticketmaster and given to a specific wallet. That wallet sold it on to somebody else. And we know where it ended up, and it allows them to scan that when they enter the event, and one-time use, and make it burnable. So once it's been used, they walk in the door, you burn that NFT, and it's gone, right? All of that makes sense to me, right, from a technological perspective. And for so long, we've had these blockchains and these NFTs specifically, right? It's a solution in search of a problem, but Starbucks is using it to solve an actual, not necessarily a problem that they have, but they're using it to enhance their customer base's experience with Starbucks. Great, right? And so that's kind of where I'm at with it. I don't know if you've got a different perspective.
No, actually, that makes sense. It's like kind of the only thing to add there is that if you mentioned burning it down, which again brings us back to the whole idea of centralizing this stuff, right? Like, I don't know how you would keep that truly decentralized and then burn that NFT, right? Like that might be problematic. I guess what I'm saying is there's still infrastructure at the end of the day behind this stuff. So yes, I think it's cool. I think it's another unique way to have some truly unique value. I think that's cool. But we have done this in other ways, but it's just I think it's cool, but I'm tempering all of that with still require centralized infrastructure.
Oh, it definitely does, right? Because it's all still within. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely is, because if you read about it, they're calling it Starbucks Odyssey, right? And like you can pay directly for limited edition stamps, right, as they're calling them, or NFTs, that allow you to accrue different rewards, some of which are, hey, maybe you get a trip to whatever, a coffee farm somewhere, right? it's kind of an interesting idea. Once you've used it though, right? Like whether it gets burned or whether it's recorded that NFT has been used up so it can't be sold again or whatever it is, it does go back to a centralized authority. There's a centralized database that's associated with it, or a centralized blockchain, whatever they happen to be using. And it might be interesting if our friend wants to come talk about it, we could get him on to see if he would give us more information, but I don't know if he can necessarily do that.
Yeah, I know they even have a huge disclaimer at the end of the article you posted that was like future facing looking statements, it gives all the different
disclaimers.
Yeah. So it's huge. So I don't know. We'll see. I would put the offer out there. If we can do it, we can make it happen. Great.
Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
But I would be interested, like anybody else, anyone that's listening, right? If you hear of interesting use cases for Web3, for NFTs, jump into the Slack channel and let us know about them, because it's super interesting to me to see this intersection between mobile apps, like DApps, right? So distributed applications, the blockchains that they're using, what the technology actually is that's going into this, because we're at this cross section of we're storing information on these chains. We're doing it from a traditional web app, or application perspective. So there are edge cases that we haven't thought about quite yet that are going to cause problems. You just know that they are, and there's going to be more security issues that pop up from them. So if you hear about stories like Starbucks or like, whatever else that is larger organizations that are implementing this sorts of technology, let us know what those are. Because it would be an interesting discussion to have, a deeper discussion to have.
Absolutely.
Anyway, we've been talking for over an hour. Ken, is there anything else that you want to bring up? I did post it up a little earlier. We are teaching practical secure code review at DeepSec in Vienna. It's on Twitter. If you are in the EU and would like to, if you've been looking for an opportunity to take that course, please jump in. Or if you just want to get together during DeepSec or somewhere around there in like mid-November, let us know. We'd love to do a happy hour somewhere, or even just an event while we're in the Europe region. Anything else, Ken, that you want to bring up for today?
Nope. I think we're good. That was Thanks for it was a good. Thanks for the podcast. Thanks for everyone who's listening. It's and nothing else to add today.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks for the feedback and the interactions. We love doing the podcast. Obviously, that's why we're here. So appreciate all the feedback, and we'll see everyone next week. Next week, it's probably going to be an irregular podcast day as well. Just watch the YouTube channel and Slack and Twitter for updates.
Yeah, we'll try and get this time, we kind of last minute decided to do it, but for next week, we already know there's going to be an interruption. We didn't know that this week, so we'll try and schedule it ahead and communicate it better next week. Yeah.
Yep. Sweet. All right. Thanks everybody. We'll see y'all online.
Thanks.